Dorothy Errair is the president of the World War II Flight Nurses. She attended the 2005 convention and the 2007 convention in Colorado Springs. She was interviewed at both reunions about her years as a flight nurse. Her stories are as fascinating as she is a wonderful personality.
On December the 7th, I was passing bedpans when President Roosevelt came on the radio to announce the invasion in Pearl Harbor. I knew right then I was going to join. I was 1 month from graduating from nursing school. So I knew that day, and I went on. As I graduated, I took up some advanced training. Nurses didn't have advanced classes in those days, but I lived in Detroit. And Detroit had industrial nurse training, which I took, which was emergency procedures, and it was very good. I took that and I wrote in my application to join. I would be available after the first of the year because I'd been in nursing school for 3 Christmases. I wanted to be home for one Christmas. So I said I'd be available after the first. And promptly my orders came through dated the 2nd of January. And so there I was, green as could be. And I'm an eager beaver, so I joined in Detroit. Went to Chicago, changed trains to go down into southern Illinois at one of the early advanced training schools. The hospital had recently been constructed out of portables out in the middle of the cornfield. There were 6 nurses. We didn't have many patients, but one of my first jobs was emptying the mouse traps from when they caught the mice in the park field at night, flushing them down the drains. And I was gradually getting accustomed to it when the flood came. Now the Wabash River flows right down by Vincennes, Indiana, and we were 10 miles from Vincennes in the farm field. Well, when the river came in, we stood in this bright sunshine and watched all the water coming into us. The baseball field had a building in it, and the water came to within 2 feet at the top of the building. Now, what was the building? 8 foot high. I'll just give you an idea how the water, and you could see it, the sun is shining, no rain, and here's the water coming in. It just circled the field, and in pictures, it looks like George Field was an island. We had no way in and no way out except the 2 cedar planes that flew, and we had a couple of ducks that carried back and forth. The first C-47 I ever saw flew in with food. We, in the hospital area, everything was bumped. You were, trying to keep everybody well. We had a lot of flu cases. A couple of people got food poisoning. And then one night, I worked the night shift. One night, 2 o'clock in the morning, the levee broke. So we had to pick up and evacuate the hospital area. And we had to take them to the center of the field, which was the highest. We had about 3 days notice that it might break. And I had people ward some of the patients and some of the ward men posted at the where they kept the clothes. Anyway, so someone could pass out their clothes so that they couldn't run around in their pajamas. Even if they weren't completely well, they could wear their uniforms. Those that we knew were going to transport by stretcher, we put the stretchers under the bed. Now, I never done any kind of emergency things before, so it was really, and you didn't have much help because no one else had ever done it. But we, within 10 minutes, we evacuated 4 hospitals. This is still in the States. I hadn't even got to the exciting parts yet. But it was great, except we all got soaked in rain because it was pouring down that night. And in the middle of the night, we left like at 2 a.m. By 6 o'clock, we had everybody settled. And then the roof of the building we moved to started leaking. So we had the guys in bed with a bucket between their knees trying to catch the drips. I wish we had camera because it was really funny. But their humor was up. And then they said, well, when's breakfast? I said, who would have time to think about breakfast? But they all survived. And it took about 10 days for the water to go down, for everything to settle. Just as it got back to, even going to have a white uniform on again instead of running around in slacks. I got my orders to move.
Before you go on, who were your patients there?
It was all part of the advanced flying school. The boys got their wings at our place, and then they went on to other squadrons. So we had the component, for the clothing, the cooks, the bakers, the base people that they had there.
Okay.
And then we had a small hospital. We had about 4 doctors, 6 nurses. So it was kind of small, but we had good time. Oh, when we had time, we did work in spite of all the things that were going on.
Then you got orders.
And the orders were to report to Louisville. We couldn't get there. We couldn't drive out. They had ducks. And there were 3 nurses from the group being transferred to Louisville. 3 in suitcases wouldn't fit in the duck. So they got a C-47 out of Louisville to come to pick us up. And the last I saw, George Field was flying away and looking down to see this little bit of stretch of land and all that water. And so that was my very first plane ride. So here I go. It's in the air evac group. It didn't dawn on me that I had never been in a plane before. It never crossed my mind. Of course, as a kid, I watched planes fly overhead. You're laying on the ground looking up at them. So I got there. And it was Derby Day. So the plane got to Louisville. It circled all around so we could see Derby Day. And I haven't missed a Derby Day since. Never been inside. But just the excitement of it. It's fun. So then we went to school. We marched to class. We marched back. We marched. I wasn't talkative enough to holler out the commands, but I was there. And I had never been, I'd been at nursing school, so naturally it's all girls. And it was just amazing. And the camaraderie, you noticed it right away. And laugh, we just had a great time. And study, but they didn't know what to teach us. They taught us Arctic survival.
So this was considered Aerovac school?
Aerovac.
Okay, at Bowman Field? Okay.
And then we had tropical survival. They didn't know what to tell us. We had to learn to load and unload patients on planes. And some of them were hefty, but we used other, men. They were the guinea pigs we traveled around with. At one point, we spent in school. They had all the things that everybody could think of emergency things, what we might find, how we might be traveling. They knew the type of plane was going to be the C-47. That's the one that was available at the time. They prepared us for Arctic survival with fur pants, jackets, hats, boots. And of course, we are in the hot Louisville summer at the time. So you imagine we didn't try on our clothes very often. We became the first group of military women to wear pants. because there's no way you could climb the steps of the plane in a skirt because the Army skirts were tight. So we finally got our order. We had started out in the old blues. Did you ever see the old blue jacket with the odd blue? The colors never matched. It's hard to put two blues together, but they succeeded. Then we switched. Later on, they added more suits. The seersuckers. Did you ever see those? They were all right, but they were different. The seersuckers made a very good house dress. That's what we called them, But they didn't fit very good, but they were baggy, but at least they had tight belts. But at work, we wore our blues. We had 2 pair of blue slacks, not the Air Force blue, a little different shade because they were modeled after the RAF uniforms. So there was the Eisenhower jackets, and they had 2 pockets on the inside. Remember the pockets. And then we had 2 tops, 2 pants, 1 skirt, and 2 hats, and all in the blue with a red trim around it. Incidentally, later on, the air evac nurses were known for being very buxom. And what it was, we rolled up toilet paper in rolls, like individual amounts, and our inside jackets were stuffed with toilet paper. You didn't have any other pockets. The little pockets up on the top didn't hold very much. So we all adapt. That was very logical, we thought. Never realizing we would get that designation. And it was towards the end of the war before somebody finally let out what they were all thinking. But it was practical. You carried what you needed with you. Don't you think that was reasonable? Of course. But that's just the way. But we did things as we went along. When our class finished, it was right around the July 4th celebration of 43. My mother was very much against my going into service. There are men there. Well, what do you just... No, here I am, 22 years old. So there's men, I wasn't chasing anybody. I had dated very little, only because I always had my nose in a book. And so, so it's a date. It just didn't bother me. But my father got enough. They didn't have gas, they had gas coupons in Detroit. And they took the Greyhound bus from Detroit down to Louisville. First time they ever traveled that far in a bus. Brought my kid sister with them. She's 10 years younger than I. So I was 22 and she's 12. And of course she's all bug-eyed. All these uniforms. Ooh. 12-year-old. And the day they got there, we were at bivouac. Some place in the Kentucky hills. They had slept in a tent a whole week. And I swear every rock in Kentucky was under the bed, under the bedroll we had. They invaded, the boys from the field had made up plans at night as far as raids. And so we had a sentry around the post, and we never did get much sleep because somebody was always calling a raid. Gunshots going off and all. But we survived. The meals were pretty bad, but we survived that too. And then at the end, the last day we left, we come back to Bowman Field. That was our graduation night. So then here we were, all this mud and grit that we've been living in for a week, trying to get our hair washed so we could at least comb it up through it. Remember, no hairspray in those days. To meet my folks, I didn't want her to see me all in fatigues and scared at it. But we had a time, we had a ball. I spent more time at the ball talking to my folks because they hadn't seen me in a while. And my kid sister was just rushed by all the boys from Fort Knox that came over, mostly the glider boys. And oh, my 12-year-old sister was the hit of the ball. Fun stuff. And oddly enough, that's the only thing my sister remembers from my days of service. You know, she's cute. We just got settled as a group, as a squadron. Our group became the 807th. And just about the time we graduated, I got word that the only boyfriend I ever had was missing in action in CBI. And here you are, getting ready to go overseas, and you hear something like that, it's pretty devastating. They never heard from him again. In fact, to this day, he's still missing in action. But you only hear of missing in action in Vietnam. The others you never hear of. I was able to follow through with it. I can't even remember what he looked like now, but it was important at that time. And, but he, even after the war, there was never any word. His buddy married my girlfriend, so I was able to keep in touch like that. So that made me a little bit edgier. So we went overseas we graduated in July, started overseas in August. We went out through the deembarkation of place in New Jersey. But anyway, we left through Jersey City. We took a train to New York, crossed the ferry to get on the boats. And I remember the Red Cross ladies were all passing out donuts, a big long line of donuts. And we got on board ship. I don't know, God, it was a troop ship. I don't think I ever saw the whole thing from the outside. But they put us in a room, and if you can imagine, pipes, and there were 4 cots coming out each side of these 2 pipes. That was 4. There were 16 of us in this little dinky room that was just about the size of that bed. Looked like 6, but it was the gun crew. So we had a toilet, 1 wash basin, and 16 cots. And our bedroll and our B4 bag and the not a bedroll, it was a B4 bag and the other big bag we carried. That was all we had, and those were stacked on the side. So then we pulled out of the Ark Harbor, and I remember when we passed the Statue of Liberty, there wasn't a sound on that whole ship. There was more than 10,000 troops on the ship. Everybody was so quiet. And I think everybody was saying, I'm going to climb you when I get back. And I did. I got to climb her when I got back. But we, the ship went 10 minutes this way, 10, all the way across the Atlantic. There was a big convoy, and rows and rows, and we were the second in on the left side. And every 10 minutes we changed. You can almost set your watch by the, we're turning again. There were no chairs to sit on. The only thing we could sit on when we were up on deck was the big boxes that contained the life vests. So everybody would climb up on them, and that's where we would have our talk, or either meet people or your buddies. And one of the days, one of the pilots come up, and he says, my wife's going to have a baby in a few months. What's going to happen? And I said, well, when it's ready, it'll come out. Oh, no, I don't mean that. How's she going to be? He wanted some. So I said, okay. So I got out a piece of paper, and we drew pictures and tried to give him a little pre-maternity care information. And then he says, well, they asked some really strange questions, but it was bothering him. He didn't know. He couldn't ask his buddies because they didn't know. So, and then another one of them had a new baby, and when does it get teeth? Well, I told him about the time, and and if he doesn't have a toothbrush, I said, well, he's really not going to need one yet. These things these guys were thinking about and didn't have anybody to ask and didn't want to ask their buddies, even those that had children. So I said, okay, I'll ask what I can. No, I said, you ask me a question, I don't know the answer. One of our doctors in our squadron was a pediatrician. So Captain Simpson got involved. Nobody had any place to go, so we were all around. So when I got questions, I didn't ask. He'd come over. And they just fired questions at him. So they were technically going to school, even though they didn't get any points for it, but they were learning. And Dr. Simpson was learning to teach, too. Certainly I was learning. But it took up a lot of our time. You could worry, if there was a possibility of a sub around, the destroyers were circling around, dropping the ash cans off the back, And certainly it's disconcerting to see those things going and thinking about what might be down there. But we really didn't have it. It was one of the largest convoys ever at that time. So that was early, mid-43. But one time someone died on the ship next to us from what, I don't know, but he was buried at sea. So here we are all watching while the very early play taps and everybody stood. We're all at attention and we see the canvas bag go over the side, It wasn't very pleasant to watch, but at least you knew what happened to him. And I never found out, who, what, when, what happened. But eventually we got across. When we went through the Straits of Gibraltar, on maps, it looks a little narrow strip of water. Well, when you're going through it, you don't see land on either side, So we were in the Mediterranean. I remember the beautiful colors. Some parts of the Mediterranean is about the color of your ship. Oh, it is a brilliant blue, especially in the sunshine. So we got to Algiers. Oh, we had practiced abandoned ship drill off and on, but we had a big one just off the coast of Algiers. And we were in the gun crew room, so the bells went off in our room first. So naturally you're awake. One of the girls says, I can't go. My shoes don't match. I can't abandon ship, Another one couldn't find her lipstick. One of the boys next door, two fellas, they each had a leg in the same jumpsuit. It's mine, no, it's mine. But the funny thing about that was our chief nurse, who was the oldest, we were like 22 to 28 or 29. We were all in our 20s. Teach was, I think, about 32, so she was the senior one. And she was never on time for anything in her life. But that night, she and another head nurse had a bunk with two beds. She had been in bed when the alarm went off. She was up and dressed in full uniform and sitting in the lifeboat when the gun crew got on board. And they were running around in their shorts. We have never figured out how she got dressed up in complete uniform. Hat, tie, everything. Oh, that was one of the big questions we every once in a while we think about it. Who dressed each? Because she was one, she couldn't find this or she couldn't find, she had her own room usually. But she was always kind of in something she was real sharp at, but who dressed her, we never knew. And we got off at Bizerti. Now, Bizerti was just a shell of a place. The first shell place I had ever seen. Just parts of buildings standing. Saw no people. There's a cove. On just Tunis is over here, but we went into the harbor and near the harbor, and that's where we got off. The tube carrier. Then we had to get on LSDs. Those are fun to ride in. Can't see where you're going.
What are LSDs?
The landing craft, the flat ones, the sides are up and the end comes up, so you can't see over. You're all just standing. You can't see where you're going. And then took us over to the other side. Might have taken half an hour, 45 minutes to get there. So then we unloaded. And it was crowded. There were 25 nurses in one tent and 10,000 troops around us. And so we were trying to get settled. The boys at least put up the tents for us. And we were all trying to get settled. So we had our cots, so we had open mosquito netting to put around. So we were trying to get all assembled. And just about the time we found something to eat, the air raid sirens were off. The Germans were flying, dropping bombs around us. We were just sitting down in this big open field to watch a movie. They couldn't show movies at night, but they could show them later in the day. And they had a screen like up against some trees, so you could, it was something anyway. We just got started. And we were all, of course, sitting on the ground. So we got up and ran back into the trees. And I don't know who was with me, one of the girls. And I heard some men, ladies, ladies, ladies. You know, first place, that you wondered who was. And here was a British captain. And there was a bomb shelter made in a tree. And it was a hollowed out tree. So it must have been, I don't know, snipers, I don't know who was there, but anyway, he called us in there for some protection. And it was only big enough for, let's see, there was 2 nurses. It was the 3 people, it made it pretty crowded. And then he pops out the bottle of wine, and we sat in my first bottle, we were drinking wine. We didn't have any glasses, we just kept passing the one bottle around. And that was my first bomb shelter. But you know, all these different things, you know, from, I was only 2 children, went to school, and just such a quiet upbringing in school. I never taught, believe me or not. They couldn't get me to open my mouth in school. See, now they can't shut me up. But it's just the way it was, you know. And then to suddenly be in this position of all of these things happening. Oh, it was like magic, because you what next? What's going to happen next? So we moved into Tunis in a villa. The villa had not been used for quite some time. We had rooms to open up our things. Of course, air conditioning didn't exist, and temperature about 120 in the daytime. But we were managing, except for one great big problem. The plumbing didn't work. Well, I got busy with a shovel, and we found out where the obstruction was. And heaven knows how long it had not worked. Anyway, we got the pipes all cleaned out here. And pretty soon everything flushed, and all it was just a plug pipe, you know. So that was one of my first jobs when we landed in North Africa, to get the plumbing work. And only because my father was one of these curious people, and one of his favorite magazines was Popular Mechanic. Did you ever read it? And he would go through it, and I would go through it. You'd be surprised how much you can pick up. We had no other magazines in the house, and I read everything in sight. So at least I had a little idea of the plumbing problems, you know. So we were there for a month. no patients yet, because we weren't associated with any hospitals. I don't know where our doctors were. We never saw them after we got off the ship. So we were all set to move to Sicily. Now, if you look where North Africa is, Sicily was just the island just north of where we were. The day before they moved, some bug hit me and I'm hauled off to the hospital with high fever. I vaguely remember going there. But they left me. I had one little small bag with me. I didn't even have extra clothes because they took all my extra things with me. I think they left me a toothbrush and a lipstick. It was about what I had in my purse. But anyway, it was 2 or 3 days. They were pumping me with all kinds of medicine. Remember, we didn't have penicillin yet. It was some of the other stuff. It was just before penicillin. It was all pills. So here they were forcing liquids on me, forcing pills. And it was like the 3rd day. I finally got my temp down. And I woke up in the morning and I thought, boy, I had the strangest dream last night. So I went out to check the night nurse. And I said, did I have some visitors during the night? Oh, yes. Are you ready to go for your flight? You know, what flight? Well, it seemed they had an American pilot who had crash landed on the island of Sardinia. He was in an Italian hospital. Italy had just surrendered. September the 3rd was the day Italy surrendered. And so, but they still had bases all around. And I didn't even know where Sardinia was. So funny, somebody gave me an idea. And during the night, I said, well, yes, I'll go. The air evac first time. Well, I'd certainly been to school enough. Nobody told me very much because nobody knew very much. I'm game. Except I forgot one thing. I had 3 days of forced fluids. Well, I tried to find a John before I got on the plane. No Johns, open slit trenches. It's awfully hard to aim at a slit trench where it slacks. Well, I was too bad, so I'll wait till the next one goes up. So it was about a 2-hour flight from Tunis up to Sardinia, very up the tip of Sardinia. Well, we got there. It was an Italian base. They had a full corps of planes. But everything was grounded. It stopped on account of they surrendered. And I remember getting out. I had checked the plane out, and there was no John in the back of the C-47s. Most of them didn't have any. Once in a blue moon, you thought. So we go in the Italian colonel. Oh, he comes up. He's bowing to me. He didn't pay any attention to the captain and the rest of the crew, I'm the lone second lieutenant, but, he's very, a woman. You must stay for lunch. We finally figured out the communication. And here, there's this big table. And it was all very nicely set. And bottles of wine, glasses, all kinds of liquids. Well, I looked all around. We finally got somebody that understood American. Is there a bathroom? Oh, yeah, come in here are long slit trenches. That's all there was, Well, I wasn't that eager. So anyway, I kept thinking, well, I told her, of course, did you ever have to go for a long time when you get your hands to hurt? Oh, man, I'm holding my fist. I wouldn't eat anything. I wouldn't drink anything. And the colonel sat right next to me. He put me at his right, I'm the honored guest. Well, the captain that flew the plane was sitting across, and I kept saying, don't laugh, because he was just getting such a big bang out of this. So I kept, my hands are hurting. No, I'm not hungry, thank you. No, thank you. No, me, no. And the crew, the Dickens, I was facing them with the Italians behind me. I'm trying to be very nonchalant about the whole thing. And my hands hurt. I was starting to hurt. Oh, the meal lasted about an hour. Oh, so finally we had to, but the patient was at a nearby hospital and we were eating while they were bringing him down the mountain. So I finally got over it. He was put up in the plane. He was in pretty good shape. They'd amputated his leg, but he was, no particular pain. He was comfortable. So I got him settled as best I could, but I was completely miserable. And so while we started flying back, and I kept thinking, 2 hours more, I'm going to bust, But finally the crew chief saved my life because when he was off, while we were eating with the Italian, he found a pail and some paper, and he made a little curtain, or I don't think it was a bag of some kind. He hung over the door. And he's gonna have it. He put me in the back. Like, oh, I would, because, you're not hurt, you're not wounded, but you sure can't work under those circumstances, Oh, but I was completely drained. And I'm glad the patient did good. The patient was much better than I was all the way back. Oh, and I try not to let the patient know what was wrong with me, but the crew I was on the plane knew, and they just kept laughing. Don't you dare laugh! You're going to be in this position someday, But it was so that was my first air adventure. And when I finally, then I left the hospital that next morning. I had to go back to Korea at the hospital, and they turned me loose. Do you know what, by now we both know what travel orders are. I was returned out of the hospital in Tunis. No travel orders. I had just my ID, spot on. And I said, well, they've all transferred to Sicily. So I hitched a ride in a British ambulance that came along to the airfield. I got to El Buena and looked around, tried to find some C-47s. Finally found some. They were noisy, and I didn't know what the other planes were even, except looking at charts, But we didn't have very many planes around, B-24s was the big ones. Occasionally you'd see a 17, and it was probably more C-47s than anything else because it was troop carrier. Everything was moving.
So nobody really knew where you were?
Nobody knew me.
You were walking around trying to find...
And I found a C-47. I found some troop carriers. I found a plane going to Sicily, and I hitched a ride. Now imagine, you couldn't do that in this day and age. No. So you're going to Sicily, good. I didn't know where the nurses were. What town are they in? I haven't to Vegas. So I got over into Gela, which happens to be where the invasion of Sicily took place. And I got there, and went over to base ops, and I said, yeah, some nurses come through here in the last couple of days. Oh, yeah, we had a bunch of... I said, do you know where they went to? Yeah, he told me that they went to Catania. Can you telephone over there? Yeah. I said, well, would you call and let them know I'm here and you do have a plane going in that direction? I'll check. So pretty soon I hopped on a plane and went over to Catania. Gela is at the lower end of Sicily. Catania was the side closest to Italy. And so I hitched a ride again. It surprised me to be able to do that. And I look back, I had never hitchhiked a ride in my life. But when I was in service, you did as you were told. But here I am, suddenly cut loose. I'm cut loose from everybody. And half the people around don't even speak English. But that's what I did. And I got to Catania, called the base, and they sent a jeep down, pick me up, and take me to the house. And my chief says, oh, so glad to see you. And then I started telling her all the things that had happened. I was the first of the squadron to even ever evac a patient. I hadn't even got to see the patients yet. So then I ended up on the bottom of the list as far as to go. Yeah. But that was the way I started out. And I wasn't trying to get in any trouble. I just doing what had to be done, you know. Oh, they laughed about it, but well, we had nice quarters. They're cold. I had mold all over the wall because the outside of the room. This is a villa, but there was a staircase going up the wall, and the mold was from the bricks against the bricks, and then the mold was right in the bedroom. We don't, the room where we had our cots, and my roommate and I had it. But if you touched it, it would all come off just like snow. It was cold in the wintertime. But that was September. It was October when we got settled over there. In the end of October is when 13 of our nurses went missing in action. I was the 14th on the list. Don't ask me how I got so close to all this. And all my life had been rather routine, and all of a sudden, things are happening. So, okay, what's next? So we settled down, and the 2nd of December was when the girls went missing. I was up and ready to go, but they had 13 nurses, 13 sergeants. We used to be a team, but the crew of the planes, that was all that. But they didn't have enough seats for me. So at the last minute, I was scratched, so I didn't go. So the next morning, I took off where I was supposed to go. They were supposed to go partly to one base where we had 6 beds 6 cots in a room. One of our doctors was there, and then the other was Barry, which also had another one of her doctors, some of the crewmen, and also 6 cots. But 13 went up. I kept thinking, where are they going to put? They haven't got that many cots. Well, they'll figure something out. And then I got there the next day, and there was nobody. No, no one knew where. So that they went missing on the 2nd. I think I was there 3rd, 4th, 5th. It was like 4 or 5 days. It was just 2 of us had gone, and we were doing all the air deck, and we couldn't figure out where they were. We would make 2 flights a day, depending on how far they were. We didn't fly at night. The fields were not lit, and everything was, the jeeps or everything they had part of the lights covered, so they only showed down. But when we stayed, the first time we stayed in a hotel, and we had six cots in one hotel in the downtown part of Barrie. It was a modern town. It had never any destruction, and it was nice. And see, they went missing on the 2nd of October. This was November. Missing in November, and on the 2nd of December, there were, I think, 4 of us there at Barrie, and our commanding officer said he was coming out to tell us he had some information for us. So we were going to have a meeting in our room after we went to the transit mess hall. Now, when you're traveling, your transit mess is open from here to there and nothing in between, until it opened again. So we went over to eat, and then everybody was there, and the mess hall kind of cleared out. He says, well, we'll have our meeting here instead of going back to the room. And we had the meeting, and he told us they knew where the girls were, that they were down in Albania. Albania was in the midst of a civil war and a German occupation. The British Underground had contacted them. Have you read Albanian Escape yet? You got it yet. They read it. And so, but the partisans had got to the girls first, and when they first saw them, they thought it was the American invasion. 13 nurses and 13 sergeants, the invasion. But they didn't know it was first Americans they had seen. So they greeted the girls, protected them, and then when they realized, you had to find somebody that could speak English to try to talk to. And we had a little bit of few words in German and Italian that they taught us, but certainly nothing, whatever they speak, was different. But anyway, they didn't have housing for them, but they started getting them together, and with 13 men and 13 women, they put them up in different houses. This house took through 2 or 3. They didn't have beds. They slept on the floors. One of my girlfriends said she remembers sleeping with the chickens, and she said it was so disconcerting to wake up at night with the chicken crawling all over your face, But they made out. Nobody had clean clothes. Going to the bathroom was a problem. You try to, if one found a place to go, then they'd pass the word along to everybody else. One of them wiped herself with something that turned out to be poison ivy, and she had some problems. Doing what you had to do. But remember, we had no training. No one ever mentioned anything like this. No one ever thought of the possibility of anybody being stranded. But we laugh a lot about it. But they said they were safe and they were going to try to fly in and get them. They did try. Someone from the CIA, his name was Smith, was dropped down in that area to try to help them. And I met him years later, but of course he had never done that before either. He never had that many strangers to, try to protect or try to take care of. So the Albanian people were very nice to the girls. They shared what food they had, and they didn't have enough for them, but they shared. Anna Stenson Manjevich wrote the book. The book is really very, very good reading. But when you read it, it's almost unbelievable that could happen. But during their flight and efforts to move, they had landed inland quite a bit. The plane had radio trouble. Then it had no radio. Then they had engine trouble. Anyway, they crash landed, but nobody was hurt. They just landed in a field. And they couldn't tell anybody where they were. It was foggy. We hadn't been over there very long to establish any kind of communications or secret stuff. But the British were a big help. At one point, they dropped hobnail shoes to the girls. Remember, this was wintertime. They went down in October and they were there through the bad weather. And the hobnail shoes were naturally men's shoes. That's all they had. So they stuffed them full of straw or anything else. They didn't have paper. They looked for paper. Apparently the country didn't have newspapers. They had some messages would be up on the walls. That's the way they communicated. But they were doing. But the night we got the word that they were safe, we all felt that was December 2nd. Oh, such relief. They're alive, now we get them up. So instead of going back to the hotel, we went down to the theater, which was right along the bay. In the pictures that's in Jen's book, you can see the bay. You can see all the ships in the harbor. They were setting up the 15th Air Force in Foggia, which is just north of Barrie. So a lot of troop supplies and everything were coming in. Usually the harbor was dark, but because they were unloading so much and everybody was getting cocky, they left the lights on. So when the German planes went around, we used to see him every night. It was at 5 o'clock Charlie or 5 o'clock something. We had a name for him. You see him fly over. And the motor is a different sounding than ours. So everybody knew who he was. It was just a little, I think it was, I don't even know if he had 2 inches. He might have, I think. So nobody paid attention to him. Till just this week, after we finished eating, we went to the theater. All of a sudden, the ceiling fell in on us. Their sirens are going off. The bombs are dropping. What do we do next? We backed away from the center of the theater. There was a whole glass ceiling on this big theater where we were watching Sonia Henney, Sun Valley Serenade. And just as she was pulling up her leg or doing something with her leg in a garter or something, is when I still want to get that. I'm not even sure what happened to the rest of the movie because I never saw it again. But we all moved to the sides of the building because glass, smoke, and of course the sirens were loud once the ceiling was gone. And I remember standing next to this doorway and I felt it. And it was blocked and it was about that wide. But the door that was there had moved 3 inches from the solid wall, stone block, or whatever they built on it. Well, then we always carried flashlights. Lights were not very dependable. And I had a flashlight and a whole big batch of Band-Aids. So I'm going around. Everybody got cut by the flying glass. They were minor, but I used up all of my Band-Aids. So finally we decided to walk back to the theater, to the hotel where we were staying. You've ever been to Italy? Okay. The store fronts. Now you can imagine this was the width of the store. They have a metal roll-up door. And at night they pull the door down and there's a padlock on the floor. That's the way they lock it. When the explosions came, all those metal doors are still locked at the bottom, but out in the streets. So we were walking the streets, you couldn't find the sidewalks. We were walking on top of all these metal doors to get back to the hotel. We were like 3 blocks away. When we got back to the hotel, the 4-story building next to the hotel disappeared. All it was rubble. Just rubble, just a big pile of rubble. One wall was there. And I remember there was still a bathtub fastened to the wall with towels hanging on the bar. Explain it. There is no explanation. I don't know how many people lived in there because it was stores on the bottom and apartments, but I never did hear how many died. Oh, but there was one of the shops was a photo studio, and I had been there a few weeks before. Come on, let's have a picture taken. So I had a picture taken. And on my way to the supper that night, I had stopped and picked up my pictures, and they were in my pocket. And when I got back, entire stores, just rubble, right out into the old streets. So we went to our hotel, which was made of stone that, was pretty sturdy, except the glass was gone. And we went up to marble steps, marble every place. They don't have a lot of wood, so everything's stone. Went up to the room. The windows that faced that building that no longer was there, they had a door, folded door. They had a glass door, and they had a screen. All 3 doors were lined, we had 2 or 3 cots. All these things are all laying across the cot. I had a little bag, little musette bag that I carried with extra clothes. You always carried a couple days' supply of clothes. And I had looked for the little stuff for the photos, and I had pulled out my stuff and didn't put them back in. And I picked up a pair of underpants that happened to be in it. It was just shredded. Just shredded. That made me mad because there's no stores over there. We only brought a certain supply with us, you know. But we got it. Then we went down. We took
Dorothy, how many more years did you serve?
This was only the first 2 months. What I'm
These are
about.
only the first 2 months. And how many years did you serve
3
altogether?
years.
3 years.
So that's just an idea of
Yeah.
what somebody
was like to
goes
join.
into these things, and things keep happening.
Where did you what, did you get another set of orders?
Oh, I never saw any more orders.
You stayed there for the rest of your time in the
No,
service?
I moved. All we ever did, we moved. Our home base first was a month in Tunis. We went to Catania from October through June, so it was like a little more than 6 months. Then we moved to Rome. We were in Rome another 4 or 5 months. Then we moved to Siena for another few months. I ended up in Leghorn. But as the line moved up Italy, we were evacuating American troops and British troops. We had a British hospital. We took the American troops, like if you take them back to Rome, the American troops would go to the American hospital, the British troops to the British hospital.
Did you fly almost every day?
Just about. The weather. Weather was always.
And how many patients would be on each plane?
18 on the smaller planes, 24 on the bigger.
And
we never had any of the big, huge planes because you didn't have runways.
What was your crew like? Your medical crew? One nurse.
One nurse. It continued the night of the explosions. We found out we knew there was something wrong with the fire. That's the first night mustard gas was ever used in World War II. Because a freighter, not a troop ship, but a freighter had come in with supplies for Foggia, and one crew, officer and 2 or 3 men, had loaded 6 containers. I'm not sure the size of the containers. 6 containers of mustard gas. These were the first ever taken out of the States and taken overseas. And they were supposed to be kept just in case. Well, the German bomb went down the smokestack, apparently, and blew the entire ship up. So the mustard gas went up, came down on the water, and there were 17 ships damaged that night, similar to Pearl Harbor, but not as many people involved. And not many people even knew about it. Then they would swim to shore, and they're swimming through oil and mustard gas.
And that mustard gas had come from the United States?
Yes, come from the United States. And for years they denied using it. It was in the early 90s. I've kept the newspaper clippings of when our government finally explained that they had sent that there for just in case. Germans didn't know it was there. I doubt they even knew till if someone read the book later on. But it caused a lot of deaths. Some of the sailors would swim and get to shore and get in to do the hospital. They'd finally get their clothes off them, but they'd probably been in these wet, stinky clothes for a couple days. And one of them, I remember talking to one of the nurses in the hospital, and she says, he looked all right, and he asked me for a drink of water, and she went to get him a drink of water. She had it in a glass. He fell over dead. The fumes just destroyed the lungs. But for years there was a battle in the newspaper. I'd read about it, and I used to cut them out, saying that our country denied the mustard gas. I recognized it on the burns. When you're in nursing school, you have all these articles you read, pictures you see, and you think, I'll never use it, but you see. And I looked at these typical injuries. These are on the sailor's arms, and they're a deep burn, not a surface burn. You know what I mean? The skin part was already, but it would go down deep. not like any other burn I've ever seen. And there's a very peculiar odor to it. And this kid still had it. But he'd been in the hospital a good 10 days. But he didn't have any trouble in his lungs. Those that got it in their lungs did not survive. And we had nothing to. The doctors didn't recognize it. The doctors were too young to have recognized something that was from World War I. But it was kept hush hush for so many years, so many years.
So you spent most of your time then in Europe?
Oh, all the time.
All the time. And
Went from Africa, Sicily, we moved to Italy. As the front lines moved, British lines and American lines, as they moved up the continent of Italy, we would, they had injuries or a battle, they would call our doctors, and our doctors would schedule how many patients you need. And then they would get with troop carrier and how many planes. We knew for older C-47s had racks, metal racks, and they only held 18. And the newer planes had straps that held them 40, and they carried 24. So that the doctors at each of the forward bases would contact, and that's where it went. And they'd tell us, and we'd be going up, well, we're going up 4 planes full. We might fly in one ship, because the ship the planes going towards the front would have food, mostly ammunition. And I've slept many a ride on lots of ammunition.
So you were in a total of...
We didn't see other people except the plane crew.
You were in the service a total of how many years?
3.
A total of 3 years.
I went in the 2nd of January of 43. All of 43 in service. All of 44. And 45 May. So that was two and a half years probably overseas. And then I came home, and you know how long it takes to get out.
Okay.
When the point system came out, I had enough to get out twice. But in the civilian hospital, there was short of nurses. But the military had an overabundance of nurses. The airlines met us at like I come out at Fort Dix, and they met us there, all trying to talk us to fly. Oh, it's so exciting. I said, Mister, you have no idea where I've been. I don't mean any more exciting things to happen, Because so help me, if something was going to happen. I had so many near misses with bombs. I had 3 times our plane landed and blew a tire. One time the plane went directly up, standing out. So help me, it was standing on his nose, and if it had gone forward, we'd have probably been killed. And all you're doing is hanging on. You knew you couldn't stop it, and we went right back down. Terrific bounces. I had so many near misses. My chief nurse, she told me later, she says, I don't know how I'm going to get you home. And
Dorothy, to end this interview, just give me one word of advice for nurses that are serving today.
Common sense. That's what it takes. You gotta be able to handle any situation that might come up. It might not be the right thing, but you're going to do something.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This Non-Commissioned Officers Association World War II Legacy Award is presented to Dorothy Errair. Dorothy served in the United States Army Nurse Corps during World War II and attained the rank of First Lieutenant. Lieutenant Errair was on active duty from January 1943 until the summer of 1945. After training as a flight nurse, she served in the European theater, including North African and Italian campaigns. As a member of the armed services during World War II era, Lieutenant Errair earned the National Defense Service Medal, the European, African, and Middle Eastern Service Medal, the American Theater Service Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. We thank you, ma'am, for a difficult job. Well done.
I was a student nurse, senior at Pearl Harbor Day. I heard the original President Roosevelt speech. I was in a hospital room passing bedpans, which was my job. And everything was quiet except for Roosevelt's voice. I had researched all of the different military possibilities for nurses, and so I knew there was quite a few. But then in the research, I had a little small item in the newspaper, and it said they were starting a school of air evacuation. Well, I read it and I thought, oh, I always wanted to fly. As a little kid, I'd lay on the ground and look at the clouds, and planes were, well, this is 1942, and for 41, I mean, for the Pearl Harbor. And that struck a chord. So I graduated in 1942 it was April. I had my black band. I had my pin. Then I thought, I was sure as a graduate nurse, I felt I knew everything. But then I realized there's a lot to learn yet. So I looked around, I lived in Detroit, and I went to a school of industrial nursing. All the big factories in Detroit had these schools where they were teaching nurses emergency work. Okay, I figured now I'm going to be in the service. Emergency would be the first thing I would think of. So I took that, and it was strange. Weird accidents would happen in the factories, and you did what you could. Of course, we always had a doctor there, but I learned a lot. But the big thing it gave me was confidence in what I could do. And then when I put in my application in September of 42, I said I would be available after the first of the year because I had been already 4 years in nursing school and I hadn't been home for Christmas. So I thought, well, if I'm going in the service, I might not get home for Christmas for a while. So I wanted to be there for Christmas. So my orders came through dated the 2nd of January. They took me at my word, you know. And so on New Year's Day that would be 43, I was sworn in at an insurance office nearby where I knew somebody had, was a notary public. Then I got on the train that night in Detroit. I remember my father, mother, and kid sister saw me off, my mother, you think I was going to die. I could think, this is fine. And I went off the train took me from Detroit to Chicago and changed trains in Chicago. I remember walking outside in Chicago, and this was, of course, the night of January the 2nd, about midnight, and the streets were, first time I'd ever been in Chicago. Streets were deserted. There wasn't even taxi cabs around, and it was so brittle cold, So I didn't walk, I just walked like up and down the street a little bit. I got on the Pullman. Oh, that was such a long, lonely ride. I didn't know where George Field, we were getting George Field, Illinois, which was opposite Vincennes, Indiana. The Wabash River run there. I had no idea where it was. I had no idea what I was getting in for. And about that time, you get a little weak in knees, and am I up for this, Remember, women, I was discouraged from even taking nursing. The teacher I had, all women do is get married and have kids. That was his attitude. So here I am, well, okay, I'm in for it. So in the Pullman, which I had, every time the train stopped, I looked out the window and see. The porter, he said, I will wake you up in time. Don't worry. And then in about 5 o'clock in the morning, I was in the little lounge room there, and there was another girl about my age, about my size, and we were talking. And I said, well, I'm going to get off soon. She said, yeah, so am I. And I looked at her, realized how similar. I said, George Field. She said, it was her first date, too. We hit it off. We had at least we bonded immediately. And I am still, so many years later, in touch with that girl. She lives in a nursing home in California, Northern California, but we are in touch. So when we got to, it was a Sunday morning when we got in, and a taxi met us and took us out to the base. Never seen it when they talked about the base. Well, base what, you know? And here a lot of buildings, lots of uniforms, and I remember we drove over to the nurses' quarters, and some lady, dark haired, older lady, she says, put your bags in here, go get breakfast. Yeah, it's great, but where do you put the bag? Where in there do you put the bags, you know? She and I never did get along, but I stayed there at that field until the flood came. My first emergency in service was a massive flood of the Wabash River, which covered the airfield. George Field was a flying base. The rain covered the field. The very center of the field was the highest part of ground. The hospital area was low. There was an 8-foot ditch built around the nursing quarters. Water was 8 foot high there. Now, if that had broke, our quarters would have been soaked. So I said that was my second big adventure. Survived that, just survived it, and got orders to go to Bowman Field, which was Louisville, Kentucky. We couldn't go because there was no transportation. So Louisville picked us up. They sent a C-47 up. There was 3 of us. Picked us up, and as we flew away from George Field, I looked back, it just looked like an island, completely surrounded by water. And we got to Louisville Derby Day. And you know, all these points, these are things you never forget. The plane circled around so that we could look down and see the horses and the fancy hats and all this, you know. So then I got in and barracks, the people, the regimentation, marching. We marched to class, you marched back to lunch, you marched everything. And they threw everything at us they could think of. They didn't know what would help. No one had ever done it before. So they tried to prepare us for everything. And I think they did a good job. But then, too, I was trained by the nuns. And the nuns are very fussy. You do this, and when you get done, you mop the floor. So, you know, I was perfectly at home. And everybody was pleasant. And my girlfriend right away got a boyfriend. I never dated much. I was just too busy. A boyfriend was not important to me at that age. Not that there was anything wrong with that or anything wrong with me. I just had goals, you know. And so her boyfriend was Van, and his buddy was Tex. Well, Tex happened to be from deep Texas, big and typically Texan. And so for a couple of months there, everybody, the 4 of us were always together, you know. Then I got my orders to go, and I broke up the foursome. And when I got back over to Louisville, about 2 weeks later, Pat called me to say both boys had gone to CBI and they were both missing in action. What a start, you know. And you have that, from that time on, you're afraid to form a friendship even. And that carried almost all through the war. Because you never know. And yet we were there, we flew to the front lines, pick the boys up from tents. We didn't pick them up. I mean, they were living in a hospital tent. A little ambulance, whatever they had available there, brought them to the airfield, put them on the planes. And the planes, it always bothered me, the planes were so dirty. But how can you clean them when you don't have facilities? You know, so you do the best you can.
The planes compared to what a hospital
Oh,
would be
yes,
like,
you know,
yeah.
we were, you know, scrub, wash. But the patients were always marvelous. I remember a German POW who I took care of, and I couldn't speak German, he couldn't speak English. I was at the time 23, 24, and in that area. He was maybe a little younger, I don't know. But anyway, as we were leaving, when we got to wherever we were taking him to the hospital, he ripped off his wings. Now, I don't know what exactly he was, but he had the swastika Nazi wings on it. It was cloth. He ripped it off, gave it to me, and just patted the back of my hand. You know, yeah, and I would always wonder, you know, how did they make out? We had such serious injuries. You try to keep them clean, but the object was to move, and that's what we would do. I've remembered so many of those faces, no names. Most of them couldn't pronounce anyway. But it was.
How did you keep your morale up doing that?
I don't know. We never thought about it. We were very busy. We had only been there 2 or 3 months. Well, we started out in North Africa. North Africa, we didn't see patients because they were trying to find quarters for us in Sicily. We landed there at the same time as the Sicilian invasion. So they really had to get started for somebody to find quarters for us. When we went over there, the wounded from the Sicilian invasion is what we would evacuate first. The British went to Malta. So get over that was a regular run. Americans, you would bring them back to North Africa because the hospitals weren't set up over there yet. It was always hard to see these young fellows with bad injuries, and as the war went on, the injuries were worse because there was more fighting, close fighting, and I remember the eyes. They would just look at you, you know. Tell me it didn't happen. What kind of looks? Oh, but they were wonderful, and we moved through Sicily. As Sicily was cleaned up, they moved to Salerno where they were fighting. As soon as there was an airfield big enough for the C-47, and it was a small runway we needed, we would be in there picking them up. We tried to get them the day after. And one of our doctors was with his couple of men in a Jeep. They would be ahead of us, and they would pick the patients to go to. Okay, say if it was a lot of British patients, we knew they would have a whole load of British patients going to Malta. Americans will, and they would be going to Tunis. And so he was there sorting them out. We didn't have to do that. And everything moved. You did what had to be done. You hurt for everyone that you saw. You talked about anything that would help. Later, when we started getting cigarette rations, I never smoked, but we had the ration, and I would always save what they called the good ones. Name brands they don't even have now, but anyway, then I would always carry cigarettes for the patients. They were allowed to smoke on the plane. Our planes were not air conditioned. The windows had a hole with a rubber suction thing, and when you want it, you pulled it out, and it was on a chain. So that was the air. We always had to watch those holes because when we traveled in the Jeeps, most of them were open Jeeps, we tied our caps on, you know, the V cap. You tied them on with a scarf, you know, we only had so many caps and can't lose. Besides, we didn't want to lose our hair either, or our bobby pins. Now, bobby pins, there were no bobby pins in Italy. I swear I never found one. And even though I started out with my hair quite short, the wind would, you wouldn't think of little like a bobby pin, but those were precious. And, let's see,
But you were saying that you had to be very careful about leaving those plugs out of the windows.
Yeah.
What would happen if you didn't?
Didn't leave the plugs on?
Yeah, well, if you didn't put them back in.
Well, no, the chains used to break. They would, so you couldn't put them back in,
Got it.
or they wouldn't stay. It was just a minor thing, but we always had to watch because.
Well, no, because people nowadays are so used to pressurized
Yeah.
cabins that they forget they
Nothing was pressurized. And if we went through a rainstorm, the plane leaked. And then you'd have a blanket over the patients, and then you're looking around for something to catch the drips. But the patients were always good. They were, even if you couldn't understand. We had the British had a lot of Indian Gurkhas, the Gurkhas, and there was another tribe, the ones that were less educated. They could understand English, could not speak it, much more than yes and no. They were funny. One time, one of the men, he had a smile on his face, and he was sitting cross-legged on the seats. He wasn't on a stretcher. You would have so many stretchers, and if there was some leftovers, you didn't have a stretcher. You put the seat there, folded up, put him down, and I gave him a half a stick of gum. Now, it didn't have much gum, but if they were chewing gum and we were going to be flying over the mountain, I kept the air tubes open. These were not big medical problems, but it hurt him, and I had nothing, no way to stop it. So I'd give him a half, and he took this gum, chew, 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 and big smile on his face. By the time I passed it out, come back, he wasn't chewing. Where is it? That was his attitude. He swallowed it. I said, no, we hadn't even reached the mountain yet, you know. Oh, so those were not big things, but minor things, but they were really good. And German prisoners, once in a while we had problems with them. Yeah, we always tried to keep them separate, like one aisle or something. But there was always an American who wanted to finish the war in a hurry and get over and get it. And he's injured, the others are injured. So we had to watch that. I remember President Roosevelt came over to Tunis in the early days to visit. I have a load of psychos. I mean, everybody was yelling, screaming, hollering, punching each other, you know. There's nobody but me, and I'm trying to calm them all down. And we were put in a circle pattern till President Roosevelt was on the ground. It was been an hour and a half or more. We were circling. And the medication that these boys have been given on the ground was wearing off. And I had no medication. So, you know, all right, you know, you do all you can. I don't speak German, never did, but you try to calm them down. And you try to look nonchalant. Because if I looked frightened, then they're frightened. Just like little kids, you know. And I kept thinking, President Roosevelt, if you knew what I had up here, you'd let me land first.
That's right.
But he didn't. So.
I'm going to move this at a little bit of a different angle here. I like these little stories.
Yeah, the wounded were cared for. The wounded had emergency treatment. We were doing what we could for them, but it was mainly to keep them stable till we could do no massive, not like they can do now. Now it's completely different. But it was to keep them, you're going to be all right, you know, even if you knew they weren't. But as we went on, the wounds got worse. The worst I ever saw in my life were from Anzio. And they were the Japanese Americans. They were American citizens. They're in the West. Their homes were taken away from them, their business were taken away from them, and they were all locked in isolation. When the boys turned 18, the majority joined the service. they were sent to, I believe it was Fort Hood, Texas, as a fighting unit, and they were some of the worst fighters. They put them in secretly so the Americans didn't see them, because remember, the Americans are fighting. Japan's our enemy. And they went into Anzio, which was a rather secluded, well, it wasn't it was low, but anyway, if I would have Americans and Japanese on the same plane, I would have a war right there. Well, what was our boys taught? But the massive injuries, one was 2 legs and an arm. We had a lot of tracheotomies. No, and this room is cleaner than the plane, you know. So here you are, you're trained, you're all these things, and you've got to ignore that and just keep them alive.
You do the best you can?
You do the best you can. And do you see, when they trained us, nobody knew what to teach us. We were all RNs. This was before there were very few nurses with degrees. That program hadn't been started yet, you know. So, but the Japanese boys, you look at them, they're Japanese, and you think, wait a minute, where am I? No, I'm in Italy, you know. And, but they were so pleasant, you know. And sometimes, many times, you just could put your hand on them and you could feel them relax. We're taking you for help. You couldn't promise anything, but you could do that. And pass out gum or pass out cigarettes.
Dorothy, you were an angel of mercy to these men.
Well, I was doing what had to be done. And this didn't come from book learning, it came from being taught to be a nurse and what to do in emergencies. I remember the trach patients. I had done a lot of trach work in the hospital in the States, but I remember our corpsman. It was originally trained to have 1 RN and 1 corpsman on a plane. Well, we had so many wounded. We used the corpsmen on planes by themselves, but we usually put them with walking wounded. You know, they had been just trained by the military. In Louisville, while we were going to school, we had to spend about 2 or 3 days in Louisville General Hospital. There was an elderly colored man who had a permanent tracheotomy. I saw him and I asked him if I could show the corpsmen and teach them something about it. And he was happy to wish. I have written stories about him, but I never did get his name, and I wished I had. But anyway, I had the boys see what the trach was, why it was, you know, and we went through, and each one had to take the trach out, clean it, put it back in. He would cooperate because he showed them, you know, if they weren't doing it right, he could tell them. Each of those 3 corpsmen worked on him. We had like 3 days. When I left Louisville, I don't know how much longer that man lived, but he was a masterful teacher of trach care. And in the years to follow, those 3 corpsmen each had an emergency trach to take care of in the plane. And they were able to do it. And they came to me afterwards. I did it. Patient survived. At least, you know, as far to get off to the hospital. And those boys, I was so proud of them. And they were so proud of themselves because they succeeded. These little stories are the kind I like.
Oh, I like them too. I mean, here's a man, God bless him. We don't know how many lives he may have saved.
That's right.
Because he let you guys do that.
That's right. And he listened to me. And then the nice part is coming and telling me afterwards. You know, and then of course I praise them. Because I personally had a trach that he coughed out everything. And I caught it. The window was open, the little plug, it could have gone out, and then I had nothing. So, I mean, but then I could respond. I had done it before. They hadn't even seen it before. I was just so proud of those 3. And then when they told me, they were so sheepish. Did I do it right? Oh, I said, yes, you did it right. It's so good.
A lot of heroes in that war.
There were a lot of different heroes, and not the kind that you think of with cops and robbers. And it was a lot of the quiet things that went on. And I have recorded so many of them. I have stories of nurses. Every flight nurse had some stories. I have tried to get my girls to tell me the stories. And I will be 88 years old in a couple of months. My health is good, but my aim in life is to try to get these stories where they can be preserved forever.
Well, tell me this. What would you say to the current generation or the next generation of flight nurses? Based on what you learned yourself and the stories you've heard from these other flight nurses, what are a couple of things, tips that might help them?
In an emergency, trust your instincts. Do what has to be done. Don't worry about the consequences. I have disobeyed general's rules more than one time because he wasn't a nurse. He was a general. And some patients I have told, they says, I'm a colonel, I order you. I said, you don't have your colonel stripes on pajamas, on PJs, I'm the boss. And they took it. Whether that was technically right or not, I don't know, but I know it worked. And if I'm positive about something, I'll hold my own ground.
What do you say when everything's going to hell?
Well, what can I do to stop it? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. The Japanese Americans in Casino were the worst possible injuries I have ever seen in my life. I worked in the operating room 50 years after that. But these were young bodies, so torn apart. Did you ever read Tom Brokaw's Greatest Generation? Well, I read it. I wrote a letter to Tom Brokaw. This is since the book came out. I wrote a letter to Bob Dole. Bob Dole was injured in the area that. I wrote a letter to Andy Rooney. Because he was there, he worked at Stardust near Italy, and we read him when we ever could get the paper. I wrote the senator from Hawaii, Senator Inanyu. He was one of the Japanese Americans. I wrote him a letter telling him about his marvelous boys, and he was one of the top officers. I have the most beautiful letter that he wrote back, thanking all the Errair nurses for taking care of his men. I've talked to him a couple times, but I've never met him. We went to Washington 2 years ago, and before we went, I called his office because it's 3 or 4 times. When he got the Medal of Honor, I sent him a card. He answered, and we talked on the phone, but we never did meet.
Well, tell me this. When you look back on that time in your life, what's your fondest memory?
The wonderful boys, how good they responded. Sometimes all I could do was pat their hand or give them a cigarette. If there was nothing more I could do something. And that's just what they needed. Another comical thing that happened, one of the crew chiefs had the entire ceiling of the C-47 loaded with nudes. And before I got on the plane, I took my Band-Aids and dressed them. But I was very careful. The nudes had shiny film, the shiny ones, and the tape. I knew the tape wouldn't ruin it, so it wouldn't hurt them. But the crew chief was very upset. I said, I didn't hurt your pictures. I don't want to get the boys all upset. Let's keep them all calm. And the crew chief laughed. He just thought that was so funny. But, and the boys all knew, and they looked at the booth, and they said, I bet you put them up. I said, of course I did. I said, I don't want you to get all excited. And they all looked at it. what does she know? Oh, but it was cute. You got time for a dirty story?
I do.
All right. One day, we sometimes, when we went out on a mission, the planes would carry freight up. And sometimes the freight was big, so all nurses might go on one plane, say 5 or 6 of us on one plane as passengers. Well, we did that one time, and it was in Italy, above Rome, someplace. So, we went when the flight line moved, and this this crew chief, they told me, well, hey, Whitey, your plane's over there. By the way, my maiden name was White, and that was my nickname. There's your plane over there, so I walked over to the plane. It was a crew chief, and he was cussing up a storm. And I said, hey, what's the matter with you? Oh, sorry, ma'am. He said, come and see what I'm trying to do. Well, I climbed up the steps. They had transported, I'm not sure whether it was 6 or 10 mules from South Italy, because in the mountain ranges, they would carry the ammunition up the mountain and sometimes patients down. Well, here he said, I planned on getting washing the plane down before you got here. He said, there's no water. So I said, well, we got to do something. So I found 2 GI cans that Beans used to come in. I gave one of him to me. We went out and gathered sand. There was no mud or dirt, water, anything around. We took the sand and put it on all the piles. While he's doing that, I'm out getting weeds, rolled them in, making homemade brooms. And we swept out the plane. But we couldn't wash that. We couldn't get the smell out, but we got the BM out. And when the patients got on, they said, nurse, oh, what's that? And I said, I don't know. You didn't take a bath today? And I tried not to let on. And so, of course, as soon as we got up in the air, I had all the plugs out, and the air cleared up, and it was a little bit better. And that poor crew chief, he sat away up in front where the boys couldn't see him. He was just splitting laughing at what I was trying to do. I kept thinking, the boys are wounded. They don't need to know this isn't a clean area.
That's right.
But one day, quite a few years ago, I wrote to VFW a letter, and I said, in case any of your members happen to have been patients on that plane that day, there was nothing wrong with my nose. I could smell it too. I never had an answer, never from anybody.